The atmosphere outside was chaotic. In the factory yard, over 2,000 employees had gathered to vote. Some stood in tight-knit groups, banging on drums, waving handmade signs, shouting over one another. A few arguments flared up, nothing serious yet, but enough for friends to step in and pull each other apart. The tension was thick, nearly tangible, like the heat rising off the asphalt. Inside, the factory floor had been hastily converted into a makeshift conference hall. A long table dominated the center, with chairs enough for 100. I sat at the far end, my fingers laced tightly, my back stiff. Across from me sat my girlfriend. She didn't speak, didn't blink, just stared. Her eyes shimmered with more than anger, though they hadn't turned to hate. Not yet. But I knew they would. Her father stood beside me, murmuring something about emotions running high, about how it wasn't too late to call it off. I barely heard him. The real conversation was happening in the silence between us, her and me. The kind of silence that breaks things. And tonight, everything would break. 7 years ago, I met my girlfriend, Alice. She had just inherited her grandfather's machining shop, a cavernous space filled with aging equipment, oil-stained floors, and ghosts of better years. She wasn't looking to sell it off like most expected. She was looking for a partner. Specifically, an engineer with ideas, someone who could help salvage what remained. Her grandfather's dying wish had been clear: save the shop, and protect the workers. That was why he left it to her, bypassing her father entirely. He knew she had the will to fight, even when the numbers didn't make sense. The shop had made most of its money repairing and tuning factory equipment, a modest but steady income. But when the largest factory in the area shut down, it took more than 70% of the shop's business with it. In the years that followed, the shop operated at a loss. Investors circled like vultures, but none were interested in revival. They wanted liquidation. They offered her money, not for the future of the shop, but for its bones. The equipment could be sold off piece by piece. The shelves of rare parts melted for their metals. The workers let go without a thought. That's when I entered the picture. I was the fourth son of the Martel family. Our corporation was one of the very hedge funds Alice was actively trying to avoid. Martel Capital specialized in buying out failing businesses, stripping them down, and selling off the assets for profit. We were wolves in tailored suits. And while my last name gave me a seat at the boardroom table, I never wanted to be just another Martel. Unlike my brothers, I didn't go to school for finance or business. I studied mechanical engineering. I preferred the hum of a lathe over the buzz of a trading floor. Before I even graduated college, I'd filed my first patent. By the time I met Alice, I had 5 under my belt. She was being hunted by my family's fund. They saw the shop as a target, ripe for dismantling. But I saw something else entirely. I saw potential. A chance to build something of my own. Not just a company, but a future. And maybe, just maybe, a life with her. I approached her table with cautious confidence. "Hi, are you Alice Harrington?" I asked. She looked up, her expression neutral. "Yes. And you are?" She replied, with a polite, almost curious smile. I extended my hand. "Mark Martel." The smile vanished. Her grip in the handshake was brief, perfunctory, more a formality than a greeting. She turned her attention back to the papers in front of her. "Like I've told your family before, I'm not interested in anyone looking to carve pieces out of my grandfather's company. I want partners who are here to build, not dismantle." I didn't waste the opening. I pulled out the chair across from her and sat down quickly. "That's exactly why I'm here." That made her pause. For the first time, she looked at me, really looked at me. "Even if that's true," she said slowly, "I don't see how you could help me." "Give me just a few minutes," I said, offering a calm, confident smile. "Let me show you." We ended up talking for hours. I laid everything out, my qualifications, my engineering background, the patents I held. I showed her the research I had already done on her company, its current losses, the outdated processes, the potential hidden in underused machines. I offered her a blueprint, not just for survival, but for growth. Short-term restructuring. Long-term innovation. I don't know if she was impressed, or just too exhausted to keep fighting alone, but by the end of our meeting, something in her changed. For the first time since I sat down, she smiled. Not a polite one, a real one. There was hope in her eyes. But the stakes were high, and neither of us took it lightly. She didn't want to just hand over control of her grandfather's legacy. And I didn't want to be seen as another Martel trying to take what wasn't mine. This was my chance to step out of my family's shadow and prove that I could build something with my own hands. In the end, we settled on a 30% stake in exchange for my investment and expertise. My brothers were horrified. Given how much capital I was putting in, and how close the company was to collapse, I could have negotiated far better terms. But I told them this wasn't about control. It was about creation. Supportive, in their own calculating way, they allowed me my indulgence. Still, they insisted on certain protections. I received an additional 5% stake, but that portion would be held in trust for the employees, giving them a voice in the company's future. After months of careful negotiation, the ink dried, and I officially joined the company. Not as a Martel. As a partner. The first year was the happiest of my life. For once, I wasn't feeding on the corpse of a dying company, I was helping revive one. Solving problems, not creating them. Building systems, not tearing them down. It was everything I had missed at the hedge fund, where destruction was disguised as strategy. As an engineer, this was where I belonged. Alice and I worked side by side, our strengths perfectly aligned. I brought the expertise and vision, she brought the people and the pulse. She wasn't a natural businesswoman, not yet, but she was smart, adaptable, and determined to make the company truly hers. I watched her grow into her role with awe. The shy woman who once pleaded with investors was gone, replaced by a steady, commanding presence. She earned their respect, and maybe mine too. We spent nearly all our time together, in meetings, on the shop floor, at late-night strategy sessions that bled into quiet conversations over takeout. Somewhere in the blur of it all, we fell into something we never officially named. We were dating before we even said the word. It just happened, natural, unforced, inevitable. Things were good. Not perfect. After the initial growth, the momentum plateaued. Progress slowed, numbers flattened, and something felt off. One evening at dinner, I put down my fork and said, "I think I need to go undercover." Alice looked up, surprised. "That drastic? Is it really necessary?" I nodded. "We've upgraded equipment, optimized workflows. Efficiency should be through the roof, but it's not. Either the teams are ignoring the changes, or they don't know how to use the new systems." She frowned. "I've been visiting the departments. They all say things are fine." I shrugged. "That's the problem. Either they don't understand the tools, or they're too ashamed to admit it. Or something worse is going on." She didn't argue. She just nodded slowly, trust in her eyes. I knew the plan would work. Most of the workers had no idea who I was, I'd always been in the background. Alice was the face of the company, the one who shook hands and made the rounds. I had stayed in the shadows, drafting strategies, tuning machines, designing processes. The next day, I joined the night shift team under an alias. My plan was to spend at least a month embedded with them, learning how they operated, identifying what was holding them back. I wouldn't move on to the next team until I understood their problems from the ground up. I was there to listen. To learn. But sometimes you uncover a truth you hadn't wanted to see. During my time undercover, Alice and I barely saw each other. At first, we made an effort, leaving handwritten notes, sending little messages about our day, and carving out time for date nights when we could. It wasn't just about updates on the company, it was about keeping our connection alive. But as the weeks wore on, the messages from her became shorter. Less affectionate. More businesslike. The romantic notes dwindled, and eventually stopped altogether. I kept trying, slipping in jokes, fond memories, anything to remind us of what we had. But her replies became sparse. Eventually, even those stopped. She still responded promptly to the printed reports I left on her desk, the ones detailing the workflow issues and suggested changes to improve efficiency. those she cared about. But when it came to us, it was like she didn't have the energy, or worse, the interest. I kept telling myself that once this phase was over, once the overhauls were in place and I could return to my real life, we'd find our rhythm again. We always had before. But then something shifted. I logged into my corporate email one night after weeks of neglect. I'd been living like a regular shift worker, and email hadn't exactly been a priority. Most of my communications had been physical, printed, direct. But something on the company site caught my eye, a featured article about a recent executive dinner party. Alice had never mentioned it. No note, no message, not even a passing mention. Curious, I clicked through the photos. It was a sleek, polished event, suits, gowns, smiles. And there she was, my girlfriend, radiant and composed. But what made me pause was the presence of a young man. He appeared in several pictures, always near her. Sometimes beside her. Not all, but enough to make his proximity noticeable. His gaze wasn't professional. It was familiar. Protective. Possessive? I tried not to overreact. Maybe he was just a new hire, someone she trusted. But her silence about the event lingered in the back of my mind like a sour note I couldn't ignore. There were still 2 more months of embedded observation left before I could roll out the complete overhaul. So I pushed the thought aside. Prioritized the mission. Told myself I was imagining things. But the silence didn't lift. If anything, it deepened. Meetings I should have been informed about passed without word. Changes I would have normally signed off on were implemented without my input. Alice stopped responding to even the most personal parts of my notes. It was as if I'd become invisible, forgotten for her convenience. After 8 long months and with the minor overhauls complete, I returned to the office, eager, hopeful even. But the space I walked into was unrecognizable. The team I had built was gone. The faces I had worked beside, who helped transform a dying shop into a thriving factory, missing. Confused, I moved toward my office, but a young man stepped in front of me, blocking my path. "Can I help you?" he asked, suspiciously, with a clipped, rehearsed tone. "No," I said simply, and continued walking. "Sir, if you don't identify yourself, I'll have to call security." I paused, looking at him. Something about his face nagged at me, then I placed him. He was the man from the photos. The one always near Alice. I straightened, fixing him with a cold stare. "Is Alice here?" I asked, my voice sharp with authority. He hesitated, glancing toward her office. That was all the invitation I needed. I pushed past him and opened her door without knocking. He followed, sputtering a protest, but Alice raised her hand to silence him. She didn't look surprised. Or guilty. Just tired. And I realized, in that instant, that something between us had shifted beyond recognition. "Alice, what's going on here? Who are all these people?" I asked, my voice low but firm. She walked over, shut the door gently, then wrapped her arms around me in a half-hearted hug. "Why didn't you tell me you were coming in today? I would have prepared for your return," she said, forcing a smile. I didn't return the embrace. I stepped back and met her eyes, repeating, "Who are these people? And where's the team I left in place?" Her smile vanished. She walked over to her desk and sat down, her expression suddenly sober. "They didn't work out. Most of them quit about 2 months ago." My jaw clenched. "And I'm just now hearing about this?" She looked mildly annoyed. "If you had come into the office from time to time instead of hiding out on the floor, you'd have seen what I did. Maybe people would actually recognize you." I stared at her, stunned, not just by her words, but by the tone behind them. Cold. Defensive. Almost blaming me for disappearing, even though it had been our plan. Without another word, I turned and left her office. I walked down the hallway, noticing how unfamiliar it all felt now. The office I entered had once been ours to build, to dream in. Now it was cold, impersonal, rearranged by someone else's vision. My office was just as I had left it, except for one thing, a single envelope sticking out from beneath my keyboard. It was from Carmen, one of the youngest engineers I had personally recruited. Smart, driven, loyal. "Mark, please give me a call when you get this. I'd like to explain my absence." I dialed her number immediately. The phone rang once. Twice. Then, "Mark? You're back." Her voice lit up with relief. "Are you at the office?" "Yes." "What the hell happened here?" She hesitated. "I'll explain everything later. Can you meet me this afternoon? Just keep your eyes open. Watch how things work around there now." And I did. What I saw disturbed me. Everything seemed to flow through Tony, Alice's new assistant. No one could speak to her directly anymore. Departments that used to communicate freely with leadership were now funneled through him. Staff walked on eggshells. There was no more openness, no more team spirit. Just a strange, unspoken tension. Worse, I couldn't ignore the body language between Tony and Alice. The casual familiarity. The inside jokes. The quiet touches. Glances exchanged when they thought no one was looking. But people were looking. I heard whispers, jokes from employees about what Alice and Tony got up to during lunch breaks. Of course, none of them knew I was her boyfriend. That was by design. I stayed just long enough to get a feel for the new environment, then gathered a few things and made for the door. As I reached the lobby, Tony intercepted me. "You just got here and now you're leaving early? What was the point of showing up?" he said with a sneer, arms crossed like a child in need of attention. I paused, letting my gaze roam over him with cold detachment. "Tommy, was it?" He bristled. "It's Tony." "Right. Tony." I stepped in close, lowering my voice to a quiet threat. "Here's some advice. Go back to fetching Alice her coffee or paper clips or whatever it is she has you doing, before I make an example out of you." Our eyes locked. He held his ground for a second longer than I expected, but then turned and marched straight into Alice's office. I lingered by the door, waiting to see if Alice would follow him out. She didn't. But the shouting started soon after. Raised voices, muffled by the closed door. I didn't wait to hear the words. Instead, I left. I made my way to the little dive bar a few blocks from the factory, our old haunt when we first relocated from the original shop. It was the place where the team would gather after long shifts, where ideas were tossed around like darts and laughter came easily. Now, I waited there alone. For Carmen. And maybe, finally, the truth. Carmen ran over and hugged me tightly. "It's been so long," she said, settling into the seat across from me. We caught up for a few minutes, small talk about life, old memories, and updates on the rest of the team. I listened as she told me where everyone had landed after they left the shop, and then her expression shifted. Her fingers toyed with the edge of her glass before she spoke again, her tone dropping. "It all started with Tony." I leaned forward, attentive. "He was a transplant from her father's company," she said. "As soon as he arrived, it was like everything changed. He didn't just settle in, he took over. If he made a suggestion, Alice acted like it was gospel. People he didn't like. Gone. Quietly at first, then outright." I clenched my jaw, listening. "Within a month, she named him office manager," Carmen continued. "After that, it was open season. Anyone loyal to the original team was pushed out. He brought in his people one by one. I tried to talk to Alice about it. She screamed at me and fired me on the spot." I stared at her in disbelief. "One by one, the rest of us were either pushed out or left on our own," she said quietly, finishing her drink. "This wasn't the Alice I knew, or thought I knew. This was someone else. Someone led by manipulation or something worse." "Did you ever find out who Tony really is?" I asked. "Not much," Carmen admitted. "He and Alice were close. Closer than just co-workers. The air between us grew heavier. We didn't flaunt our relationship, but people in the office knew," I said. "Did you see anything?" "Not directly," she replied, "but I saw his clothes messed up a couple of times, and they were in her office for hours with the door closed. Nobody questioned it. He made sure nobody dared to. I nodded slowly, processing. I think he's behind more than just the firings, she added. I tried applying to other jobs, but nothing. Then I changed my name on the resume, just the name. Suddenly, I started getting callbacks. The others too. It's like someone blacklisted us. Alice. Or Tony, with Alice's blessing. I exhaled sharply, the bar's dim light flickering against the glass in my hand. She's protecting him, I muttered. No matter what. Even if it means burning down everything we built. Carmen watched me, unsure what to say. Get in touch with whoever you can from the old team, I said, standing up. I want you to come back. She blinked. What about Alice? You won't be working for her, I said firmly. You'll be working for me. I'll send you the details tonight. If I have to pay you out of my own pocket, I will. I need you to lead the overhaul teams. She hesitated. Are you sure? She won't like that. I'm counting on it, I said, placing enough cash on the table to cover both our drinks. Let me worry about Alice. You just focus on getting the team back together. I turned toward the door, knowing this wasn't just a return, it was a reckoning. I headed home to the unexpected sight of Alice's car in the driveway. After months of near silence between us, and her cold demeanor at the office today, I hadn't expected to see her at all, let alone waiting for me. I walked into the house to find her sitting on the couch. Mark, she said sweetly, but not like someone greeting their partner. There was a polite distance in her tone, like we were colleagues rather than anything more. You came back to the office without so much as a call, she said, rising to her feet. Then you dressed down my assistant in front of the entire staff. He's trying to manage that office. I closed the door behind me slowly. Well, that wasn't exactly the warm welcome I expected from you, Alice, I said, crossing my arms. Is there something you want to tell me? Mark, she began, trying to sound diplomatic, I just needed to make a few changes to improve efficiency. It doesn't help when you undermine the current leadership. Changes you made? I asked. Or did Tony make them? Because from what I've heard, he's the one calling the shots. She scoffed. He's just a mouthpiece? It lets me maintain the friendly image while still getting things done. Oh, I see, I said, stepping forward. So the long lunch breaks you take with him, that's just part of the persona, too? Some sort of off-site strategy session? A flicker of surprise crossed her face, followed quickly by anger. I'm guessing you've been talking to people who were let go and now want to stir up trouble, she snapped. Let me assure you, there's nothing inappropriate between Tony and me. Our relationship is strictly professional. I looked at her, my voice even. Alice, I don't know what this is anymore. But Tony replaced a team of experienced engineers with his own people, over petty politics. And you stood by and watched. You protected him. And now, your closeness with him is sending the same signals you once told me we had to avoid. That was your reason for keeping our relationship quiet, wasn't it? She didn't respond, so I kept going. I'll say this once. If there's something going on between you and Tony, just tell me now. We can part ways cleanly, professionally. I'm not here to make a scene. Let's be honest before this spills into something worse at work. I held her gaze. For a moment, I saw the Alice I remembered. She walked over, her voice softer this time. There's nothing between Tony and me, she said, and for a moment, I believed her. I came here to clear the air before things got any more tense. Just as she seemed ready to say more, her phone rang. She answered quickly. I couldn't hear the other voice, but whatever was said changed her expression. I'll be right there, she replied before ending the call. Mark, I have to go, there's an emergency I need to deal with. Anything I can help with? I asked. She looked startled. No, it's fine. I'll be back in a few hours. Then we can go grab something to eat. She was out the door before I could say more. Left alone, I turned my focus to the stack of files I'd brought from the office. The deeper I read, the more alarmed I became. The company I'd worked so hard to stabilize had shifted its entire business model while I was gone. Over 80% of our product was now being sold to her father's company, barely enough to cover expenses. Meanwhile, her father's firm resold the same product at a much higher margin, reaping the profits while we bore the production costs. My stomach turned. This wasn't strategy. This was exploitation. Hours passed. I made myself a small dinner, barely tasting it as I combed through spreadsheets and emails. My eyes were heavy, the weight of realization pressing down harder than the numbers in the ledgers. I checked the time. Alice never came back. I woke to sunlight bleeding through the curtains and the faint hum of early morning traffic. The other side of the bed was untouched, no imprint on the pillow, no lingering warmth. Alice never came back. I checked my phone. No missed calls. No texts. Nothing. For a moment, I just sat there, staring at the silence. Then I got up, showered, and dressed. I wasn't going to chase her. If she wanted to talk, she knew where to find me. But I had work to do. At the office, Tony was already strutting around like he owned the place. A few heads turned when I walked in, some curious, some wary. I ignored them and went straight to my office, locking the door behind me. The files I'd looked over last night were just the surface. Now, I needed to dig deeper. I pulled up supplier contracts, delivery logs, and internal memos. The paper trail was long and messy, but the pattern was clear. Alice's father's company was bleeding us dry, taking nearly our entire output at cost, reselling it at profit, and using Tony as the gatekeeper. All while Alice stood in the middle, holding the strings. There were signs of kickbacks, too. A private consulting firm being paid for efficiency audits that didn't exist, invoices for meetings that never happened, signed off by Tony and approved by Alice. I sat back in my chair, stunned. This wasn't just negligence. It was betrayal. And I was starting to see the full picture. These were all methods I had seen before. I was an engineer by choice, I was born a Martel. Looking at the records, I could tell in an instant, one company was feasting off the other for profit. I began copying everything to a secure file and sent it to my oldest brother, Aaron. He called me 30 minutes later. "This is bad, Mark," he said immediately. "What exactly is going on over there?" "It looks like we're being robbed." "That's obvious. Why is it happening, and why did you allow it?" I went through the story. Going undercover. The state of the company when I returned. Carmen. Tony. Everything. Aaron was silent until I finished. "This doesn't make sense. If she wanted to do this, if Alice really wanted to funnel money, we could have done it cleaner. Smarter. Without half the legal issues they're walking into." He wasn't wrong. It was what I'd been thinking since I first started digging. Alice had wanted to save the company once. That's why she went with me. So why now was she draining it dry? Did she even know? Or was this Tony's play? "So, what's our response?" Aaron asked. Alice held the largest share of the company, 45% of the controlling shares. I had 30%. The employees owned 5%, with voting rights if 70% turnout was met. The other 20% was in the hands of investors and minor holdings. "Start working the 20%, I said. "I'll work my side." Aaron hung up without another word, already setting the plan in motion. I wasn't sure where Alice stood in all of this, whether she was blind or complicit. But I wasn't going to tip my hand. Not yet. I could do this quietly while I rebuilt what mattered most, the team. My phone buzzed, Carmen again. "Everyone but Drew is in. He found a job on the West Coast." I texted back. "Tell him congrats. Meet me at the bar in 2 hours." Perfect. The pieces were coming back together. I stepped out of my office and headed for the floor. Tony spotted me immediately. "Back again?" he said, his smug grin locked in place. "Didn't expect to see you so soon after your little tantrum yesterday." I didn't slow down. "Get out of my way, Tony." As I passed, our shoulders brushed, barely a bump. "But Tony, with the flair of a B-list actor, staggered backward, tossing the papers in his hand dramatically into the air before crashing to the ground with a groan. Alice came running out of her office, shoving past me to drop to his side. "What the hell is your problem, Mark?" she yelled, fury blazing in her eyes. Caught off guard by the sheer aggression in her voice, I stammered, "I barely touched him." One of Tony's lapdogs came running over. I heard him. He yelled at Tony to get out of his way, then shoved him. Alice knelt beside Tony, glaring up at me, while Tony, behind her, hid a satisfied smirk. "Apologize," she demanded. I scoffed. "Alice, if you're falling for something this pathetic, then I was completely wrong about you." Without another word, I turned and walked away. I could hear her still tending to Tony as I left. I met Carmen in the factory yard. She had gathered most of the original engineering team, the same people I brought in when I first started turning the company around. After a few rounds of hugs and cheers, I handed out the plans and introduced them to the teams they'd be joining. I made it a point to meet personally with the floor supervisors. Most only knew me as that quiet guy who had joined their crews for a month or more before rotating out. Now they stood there stunned to find out I wasn't just another employee, I was an executive. More than that, I was the one who had designed the changes that improved their shifts. "Wait," one of them said, "Alice took full credit for those." That didn't surprise me. The way things had been going, Alice seemed intent on erasing me from the company altogether. That made this the right time to start changing the narrative. I told the supervisors that the new hires were on my personal payroll, and that it would be best not to mention them to anyone from the main office. I didn't have to push hard, extra help, free of charge. They didn't need to be told twice. Later, while driving home, I got a call. "Alice. Mark, I need you back at the office to apologize to Tony. What you did today was unprofessional. Honestly, it was scary." "Alice," I said calmly, "I'm going to ask again, what exactly is the relationship between you and Tony?" She let out a dry sigh. "So this is a jealousy thing now?" "I'm asking because when I tell my girlfriend I didn't push someone, I'd expect her to believe me. Not stand up for the guy trying to frame me." Her silence stretched for a second too long. "If this is what you call professionalism with your assistant," I continued, "then I'm starting to wonder what exactly I am to you." More silence. I didn't wait for a reply. I hung up. When I got home, I saw a text from her waiting on my phone. "You're not the same person since you returned. I think you should take some time away from the office to reflect, until you can apologize for your actions." I replied simply, "If you don't think you'll need my help, then I'll stay away." Then I smiled, settling into the couch. It was time to begin my part of the plan. There was something Alice seemed to have forgotten: our arrangement. The company had been on its last legs when I came in. They needed trucks? I brought them in from companies the Martel firm had absorbed. The factory we'd moved into? Also acquired through Martel Holdings. But here's the twist: while the company used those assets, they were never owned by either Alice's company or Martel Holdings. They were owned by me, through my own personal company. While I'd charged them nothing for their use, I'd never signed over ownership either. Now? That leverage mattered. I called the truck yard and gave new instructions. Then I laid back on the couch and waited. Any hesitation I had about Alice vanished when Tony started sending me pictures, him and Alice together at late-night dinners, her feet resting on his lap in her office, the two of them watching the sunrise from a local bridge. There was nothing overtly scandalous, nothing that would get anyone fired. But it was clear, whatever their professional relationship was, it didn't involve much work. It stung. Not because of what they were doing, but because it made everything make sense. It seemed the only person Alice had ever told about dating me was Tony, and he was using that information like a weapon. Every picture, every smug message he sent was an attempt to break me. I didn't bite. I just let him believe he was winning. If Tony was distracted playing mind games, it would leave me free to focus on the real goal, the company. My plan was straightforward. While Aaron and my other brothers worked the board, pressing minor investors, gathering documentation on the profit siphoning, I would start choking the operational lifeline of the company, logistics. Currently, the company only turned a profit due to its contract with Harrington Corporation, Alice's father's firm. That deal provided bulk orders, but at thin margins. Barely enough to keep the investors happy. And that profit margin only existed because I had never charged for the trucks or rent on the factory. That was about to change, but not all at once. I needed the breaking point to hit just before my team finished the operational overhaul. That timing was crucial. I instructed the yard to take one truck out of service every 2 weeks. Safety inspections, mechanical issues, general wear and tear, whatever excuse worked. Quiet and slow. Within 6 months, the last of the fleet would be grounded. Until then, they'd be forced to hire freelancers, who charged by the hour and didn't know the routes. That would bleed them dry, little by little. Meanwhile, Tony was too busy playing corporate peacock, setting up executive dinners, and posting more smug pictures to even notice the decline. By the time the 5th truck was down, he finally caught on. But by then, it was too late. He and Alice had been out of state, some kind of retreat. They came back just as the 6th truck was taken offline. The system was buckling. Orders were backed up. Supplies were delayed. Independent truckers stood around on the clock, waiting to be told where to go. The bleeding had begun. Tony, of course, exploded. He shouted at everyone, truckers, floor managers, supervisors. No one escaped his tantrum. In a fit of rage, he called Michael, the manager of the truck yard. "You lazy piece of garbage." Tony barked through the phone. "You get those trucks back online now, or I swear I'll ruin you." Michael, calm as ever, responded coolly, "The trucks are down for safety and maintenance. When they're cleared, they'll roll again." Tony sneered through the receiver. "You know what, Mike? You're fired. Clean out your damn office." There was a pause. Then Michael laughed, not out of cruelty, just quiet amusement. "Yeah, I don't think so." And he hung up. Tony didn't know what I did, that Michael didn't work for Harrington. He wasn't part of Alice's company. He worked for me. So Tony's threats were meaningless. And as more trucks stopped running, the chaos only grew. By the time the 8th truck was out of commission, Tony had no choice but to go to Alice. "Didn't you read the contracts, Tony?" Alice yelled, her voice echoing off the walls of the office. "The trucks aren't ours." "They never were, they were." She stopped, lips tight, unable to say my name. Frustrated, she yanked one of the original contracts from the filing cabinet and stormed out. Her heels clicked angrily across the pavement as she made her way to the truck yard. She wore that fake calm executive smile when she approached. "Michael," she said pleasantly but firmly, "I need those trucks running. Now." "That's not possible," he replied flatly. "In fact, we just lost another one today." Alice's face darkened instantly. "I know what game you're playing," she snapped. "And I know more about contract law than you do." She waved the folded agreement like a weapon. "You don't get to dictate operations, these trucks are vital to the business." Before she could launch into another tirade, Michael calmly pulled out a laminated index card from his back pocket and read aloud, Clause 79.1b, if any vehicle is deemed potentially hazardous to the driver or crew, then said vehicle must be taken off-road for inspection and may not return to service until signed off by both the head mechanic, he pointed to a man lazily shuffling cards at a picnic table nearby, and the yard master. He tapped his chest. "That's me." He tucked the card back in his pocket. "So I might not know all about contract law," he said with a slight smile, "but I know this clause real well. It's kind of my job." Alice flushed, red with rage. "It doesn't look like there's any testing or repairs happening," she snapped, pointing accusingly at the idle crew. "Get your men working." "They're on break," he said simply. "Besides, the boss doesn't seem to mind." As he said it, another one of my trucks rolled into the yard, engine humming. Michael waved the driver over. "Just park her with the others," he called out. "Food's in the office, compliments of the boss." Alice clenched her fists, glaring. She knew she wasn't going to get anywhere here. She'd been barking up the wrong tree. If she wanted things back under control, She'd need to go straight to the source. Me. I was at home when the first call came in from Alice. I declined it. Not ignored, declined. I wanted her to know it had gone straight to voicemail. Then I did it again. And again. 7 times in total, until the amusement wore off and I finally set my phone to Do Not Disturb. She'd be furious. And soon, she'd show up in person. That was fine. I was ready. In the meantime, I sent a short text to Aaron. It's time. All shareholders. First wave. His reply came seconds later. Sent. This was the moment months of work had led to. While I had focused on logistics and operations, my brothers had been quietly shaking the tree, talking to shareholders, asking innocent-sounding questions about quarterly numbers, raising doubts about efficiency. Why were profits so thin, they asked, even though operations had supposedly improved? Now, with the trucks grinding the factory to a halt and several straight months of losses behind us, every investor received a carefully compiled document. It laid out how Alice's personal assistant, Tony, had terminated a team of specialized engineers. The same engineers who had been responsible for a massive spike in productivity and efficiency when the company was at its most profitable. Shortly after their termination? A slow and steady decline. It wasn't the whole picture, of course. The real financial rot came from the Harrington contract. A sweetheart deal that looked great on paper but offered razor-thin margins and unrealistic delivery demands, terms that benefited her father's company, not ours. But I wasn't ready to play that card just yet. This first wave was enough. Enough to make the shareholders uneasy. Enough to make them start asking questions Alice wouldn't want to answer. She had always been the face of the company. She walked the floors, talked to department heads, presented my operational improvements as if they were her own. Employees loved her for it. She seemed involved, dedicated, hands-on. But once Tony showed up, that changed. She stopped attending meetings. Stopped listening. Everything went through him. And Tony, arrogant, petty Tony, isolated her. Concerns that used to reach her desk stopped altogether. Complaints were filtered, minimized, or buried. Even when she did walk through the factory now, she couldn't believe what she saw. It was unrecognizable. No longer clean and humming with synchronized efficiency. No longer the pride of the company's revival. Now it was chaos. Cluttered, disorganized, with idle workers leaning against crates. Broken equipment stacked in corners. A building once brought back from the brink was now decaying, bit by bit, right under her nose. And this time, she wouldn't be able to blame me for it. Back at the office, Alice barely had time to sit down before the first call came in. Then another. And another. By noon, 3 of the major investors were in the building, faces tight, clipboards in hand. They weren't there for small talk. They wanted answers. Why were logistics failing? Why had a proven engineering team been dismissed? Why had Tony been given free rein with zero oversight? Alice tried to keep her cool. She cited strategic transitions and temporary setbacks, but none of it was sticking. Not when the factory had been hemorrhaging money for months and trucks were lining up in the yard with nowhere to go. One shareholder, an older woman who had supported Alice from the beginning, leaned in during the meeting and said, "This company was on its knees until someone brought it back. We all know it wasn't Tony. And now we're wondering if it was even you." That one stung. Alice didn't respond. She couldn't. Behind the scenes, the tide had already turned. Aaron and Keith, my brothers, had been quietly contacting shareholders all week. Setting up meetings. Presenting data. Highlighting every decision made under Alice's watch that led to stagnation or decline. The shareholders weren't just doubting her. They were preparing to vote. By the end of the week, a meeting was set, full board, mandatory attendance. On the agenda? Emergency restructuring. A vote of confidence. And one other line item, subtle, but brutal in its finality. Review of executive leadership and performance. I wasn't surprised when I heard the knock at the door. It wasn't urgent, not the kind you'd expect from someone panicked or angry. It was measured. Controlled. The kind of knock that screamed, "I'm trying not to lose it." I didn't move right away, let her knock again, harder this time. Then I opened the door. Alice stood there, windblown and furious, holding a printout of the shareholder memo in one hand and her phone in the other. She didn't ask to come in, she walked right past me like she owned the place. That was familiar. "You set this whole thing up," she said, her voice shaking with restrained fury. "The trucks, the engineers, the shareholders, all of it. Don't even bother denying it." I shut the door quietly behind her and leaned against it. "I wasn't planning to." Her mouth fell open slightly, like she hadn't expected me to be so blunt. She recovered quickly. "Why, Mark? Why now? Why sabotage the company we built?" I walked past her and sank onto the couch. "Because we didn't build it," I said. "I rebuilt it while you were playing politics with your father and letting Tony turn this place, and you, into his personal playground." She flinched. The words cut, and I knew they landed deep. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, quietly, "Mark, it's not like that." I raised a hand, silencing her. I didn't want to hear more excuses. "Alice, you let him fire the team that made this factory run. You handed him control of the departments. And you let him convince you I was a threat. You are a threat." She snapped, her voice rising. "Look at what you did. Instead of talking to me. If I'd come to you, would you have listened?" I cut in, voice low and measured. "Would you have believed me?" "Yes." She shouted, defiant but uncertain. I leaned forward. "Like you believed me when I said I didn't push Tony? Like you believed Carmen? Or any of the others who warned you about him?" That stopped her cold. "No," I continued, my tone quiet, bitter. "I started acting like someone who realized the woman he trusted didn't trust him back." To drive the point home, I pulled out my phone and showed her the photos Tony had been sending me, the ones of him in our office, smiling beside her. Private meetings. Closed doors. Messages meant to provoke. Her face flushed crimson. "It's not like that," she murmured, almost too soft to hear. But then she said nothing more. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Heavy. Irreversible. She stepped forward, slowly, hesitantly. "Mark, you didn't have to do this. We could've." "We're past could've," I said, cutting her off again. "You chose your side. You let Tony undermine everything I built. And now the shareholders are coming with questions you can't answer." I stood and handed her the revised contracts, her signature clear on every page. "Did you know?" I asked, flatly. She looked down at the papers, flipping through them faster and faster. I saw it then, the realization dawning in her eyes. She hadn't known the full extent. "They weren't supposed to be like this," she whispered. "I didn't know, Mark. I swear." I shrugged. "I wonder who revised the contracts you so blindly signed." Her gaze dropped to the floor. "Tell them whatever you want," I said. "That you had no idea. That those contracts bled the company dry, or that you knew about it and signed anyway. Either way, it falls on you." She looked like she wanted to scream or cry. Maybe both. But instead, she turned toward the door, paused with her hand on the knob. "You're going to destroy everything," she said, voice shaking. "Just to get back at me." "No," I said. "I'm going to save it. You just won't be in charge when I do." That Friday night was the vote. I drove up to the factory yard. There was a long line of employees signing in, all waiting for their turn to cast a ballot. I knew the turnout would be massive, their jobs were on the line. For weeks, they'd been sent home due to lack of work. Nothing had gone in or out of the factory in almost a month. They didn't know the full scope of what needed to change, but they knew something had to, or none of them would have jobs left. As my car rolled by and entered the warehouse floor, I saw crowds outside, drums, posters, chants. Some signs were aimed at me, painted with angry slogans. I figured that was Tony's handiwork, his way of deflecting the blame. But far more signs were aimed at Alice. Her recent reign hadn't made her many allies. Inside, the old warehouse had been turned into a conference hall. At the center was a large table where the vote would be called and the arguments made. I stepped out and sat at the table. A few minutes later, Alice entered, flanked by Tony and her father. She was glaring at me. Tony walked beside her, muttering to himself, clearly rehearsing his speech. Her father, however, made a beeline for me. "Mark," he said in a low voice, "we can still call this off. I know your family orchestrated this circus, but if we stop now, we can make a deal. One where everyone wins." I didn't respond. We were far past deals. Far past playing nice. After that last conversation with Alice, she knew this wasn't a lover's spat, it was a full-blown war. What she didn't know was that I'd been preparing for it while she was still playing house with Tony. The rest of the board began filing in. Murmurs echoed through the warehouse as it was announced that the employee vote had exceeded the required threshold to be considered binding. They would have a voice. Alice walked up to the microphone. "I want to thank everyone for being here today," she began, her voice steady but strained. "Even though the circumstances are difficult, your passion for Harrington Technologies would have made my grandfather proud." However, she paused and turned her eyes toward me, her finger rising. "I would like to point out that all of our recent setbacks can be traced to one man, Mark Martel." She let the name hang in the air like poison. "The issues with production, the trucks, the logistics, they all stem from a personal vendetta he has with me. The Martel family, if you don't know, is infamous for breaking apart companies, selling off their assets, and walking away with the profits while leaving hard-working people behind." She looked around the room, meeting as many eyes as she could. "We've identified the source of the problems. We're ready to fix them. But if this man gets his way, there won't be anything left to save." She stepped down. A few claps from her side of the board. Most remained quiet. I stood and walked to the mic. "My name is Mark Martel," I said. "Some of you are just learning who I am. Others," I gestured into the crowd, "remember me from the factory floor. I didn't prepare a speech. I'm an engineer, not a politician. I'm not here to tug at your emotions. I'm here to give you facts." Then I released everything. The sweetheart deal with her father's company that guaranteed Harrington Technologies operated at nearly zero profit. The quiet kickbacks Tony had taken. The damning fact that Tony was still on her father's payroll while he advised this company into a ditch. Alice's silence, her deference to Tony, even when he dismissed the specialized engineering team that had once made this company profitable. Reports from department heads backing my improvements she took credit for until things went south. I laid it all bare. Slide after slide, document after document. Inside, the warehouse fell into a stunned silence. Outside, the noise dropped to a murmur. Alice stood frozen. She could feel it, the shift. Her eyes darted from face to face, reading what she already knew. The vote wasn't going to go her way. And that's when I saw it. Not pain. Not fear. Hate. Real, visceral hate, burning in her eyes like I'd taken more than her company. Like I'd taken her. She turned from the board and stormed out of the warehouse, Tony stumbling after her, shouting her name. Her father stayed behind, staring at the floor. The board voted. The employees voted. And when the final tally came and I was handed the reins. Not out of vengeance. Out of necessity. Because they all realized what I had known for months. The only way to save Harrington Technologies was without a Harrington in charge. Alice was in the back room, her voice raised in frustration as she tore into Tony and her father. Both men spoke quickly, trying to calm her, tossing out desperate strategies, something about convincing a few board members to call for a revote, about spinning the narrative before it reached the media. But none of them believed it. Not really. I walked in calmly. Alice's eyes were rimmed red, her expression caught between fury and heartbreak. The moment she saw me, her shoulders stiffened. "You knew what this meant for me," she accused, voice trembling. I met her eyes. "I didn't betray you, Alice. You did that. You listened to Tony instead of the man who built your company back up from the ground. And now you're paying for it." A flicker of regret passed over her face, But it was gone just as fast, replaced by something colder. "I'm still the largest shareholder, Mark," she said firmly. "It won't take much for me to regain control." I nodded slowly. This was the moment I had prepared for. There was no turning back now. I took a breath. "Yeah, about that." She narrowed her eyes. "You have 45%, I said. "I'm going to need your 40. I'll leave you with 5. She laughed, sharp, bitter. "Why the hell would I give you that?" I didn't flinch. "Because if you don't, I'm going to announce, today, that we are severing all ties with Harrington Industries. No more supplies. No more deals." The words hit like a hammer. Her father paled. Even Tony looked shaken. "You know what that would mean," I continued. "Your father's company depends on our output. Without us, his stock tanks. The market crashes on him. And my brothers are already watching. They'll swoop in the moment I speak. Pick the company apart, publicly and legally." Alice stared at me, stunned into silence. "You'll end up selling your shares to save them anyway," I said. "At least this way, you keep 5%. And they get a little time to brace for the storm." I stepped closer, my tone even. "This isn't revenge, Alice. This is business. And it's the last favor I'm offering." She didn't answer. She didn't have to. She knew she'd lost. 6 months later, Harrington Technologies was profitable again. 2 months ago, we formally announced that we would no longer be supplying Harrington Industries. Their stock plummeted, though my brothers didn't get quite the feeding frenzy they'd hoped for. Still, they picked up enough to hurt. Alice had retreated, willingly, it seemed, to the old workshop her grandfather once used. It was more of a warehouse now than a machine shop, but she made it her office. A quiet, self-imposed exile. She started showing up at departments again, taking notes, talking to staff, sending back detailed reports. People saw her around, but everyone knew, she held no real power. She was a figurehead, a reminder of the past. Every year, we hosted a company barbecue. She'd show up, give a short speech, then disappear before the music even started. But this year was different. She sought me out. "Mark," she said politely, as though we hadn't spent months pretending the other didn't exist. I nodded, unsure what she wanted. "I never apologized to you," she continued. "No," I said simply. "You didn't." She exhaled. "Well, I'm sorry." Her tone was flat but honest. She wasn't fishing for forgiveness. Just stating facts. "I'm not making excuses," she said. "When you went undercover, I realized I couldn't do what you did. But I saw you could do what I did. That scared me." She looked down for a second. "Tony saw that envy in me. Twisted it. Until I was taking credit for what you built. I crossed a line. We kissed, nothing more, but it was wrong. I stopped it. You didn't deserve that." I gave a short nod. "Thank you for saying that." She nodded back and walked off without another word. She had lost everything, because she forgot who I was. A martel. A wolf. Not like my brothers, maybe. But a wolf is just the same. Alice had gone from being part of my pack to prey. And now, the company that bears her name is mine. She'll never get it back.